All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday night. We have so many things to discuss. Den is here to help out with moderation and comments. So if you have any questions or concerns or anything, leave them in the chat. Den's going to make sure I see the stuff I need to see. As always, you could support me by going to patreon.com/Hemant. And you can also subscribe to the newsletter by going to friendlyatheist.com. I appreciate that. And where do we begin? There's so much to say about the Pope. I guess we'll start with that. Let me answer one of these questions right off the bat. I know we've been doing these on Thursday nights the past few weeks because it's the summer, the spring and the summer. I'm traveling a lot. Den is doing some stuff of his own. So we're trying to juggle our schedules to make sure we can both align. Right now, Thursdays are working. So we're going to do that when we can. And if that changes in the near future, we'll let you know. But I know more people end up watching the videos I post after the live stream than the live stream. So anyway, that's what's going on with the days. Let's start by talking about the Pope. So Pope Francis died this week at 88. And there's so much to say about the Pope, but I wanted to start off by sharing one Christian evangelist's condolences to the Pope. And let me try to tell you what he was, let me tell you what he was trying to do. The guy's name is Matt Powell. He's one of these extremely right-wing creationists. And he was like, the Pope died? Well, I'm going to use that to tell everybody that they should stop being Catholic and they should become the right kind of Christian, which is whatever type of Christian he is, which is non-denominational, evangelical, creationist. So it was a 5-minute video where he made that pitch. But along the way, he's like, I got to get on their good side first so they'll listen to me. So he wanted to offer condolences to people whose hearts may be broken by the death of Pope Francis. And he wanted to give a shout out and his sympathies to a specific group of people, and it made me laugh. Let me play you a short clip here.
So I recently heard about the death of Pope Francis, and a lot of Catholics are mourning right now. And to Pope Francis's family, I do want to give you condolences on behalf of the Christians that feel bad for you personally for having lost somebody that you do love and care for.
He gave condolences to the family of Pope Francis, I guess to Pope Francis's wife and kids. Yeah, okay. Anyway, that one just made me laugh. Like, who wants to tell him? But anyway, I was talking about Pope Francis earlier today with my podcast co-host. I don't think I did a good job of explaining my feelings about Pope Francis, and you could hear that in the podcast. So I'm going to try it again, round 2 tonight, to try to tell you what's bugging me about the coverage of Pope Francis. And part of the thing that kind of annoyed me is the hagiographies that are going out about him, because people are like, this is the greatest man who ever lived, and he was wonderful, and oh no, he's gone now. And specifically, one of the things they mentioned, this is one example of it. Let me see if I can get a better version. There we go. Like, oh, Pope Francis, he's the people's Pope. He's not one of those people who lives in this palace. He took the humble route, and, he was a man of the people. Very nice. Here's another thing shared. I mean, I know Barack Obama has to say something nice about him, but this is what Obama said. He remembered Pope Francis as a rare leader who made us want to be better people, which, not exactly true. But again, I get why the former president would have to say something nice like that. This is another headline. This is from NBC News. Pope Francis leaves a legacy as a Catholic Church reformer. And look at that subtitle there. The leader of the world's 1 billion Roman Catholics addressed past scandals and embraced migrants, the poor, and gay and lesbian faithful. Some wish he had gone further. Okay, they're saying a lot there without getting extremely specific in the article. But this is what bugged me. Like, they act like he was a real ally to LGBTQ people. They act like he really elevated women in the church, things like that. And no, that's not really true. And this is what I had a hard time explaining earlier today during the podcast, which is I get that he made some incremental moves in a more tolerant, inclusive direction. But by and large, I think he did more with his style rhetorically than he actually did on paper. And the thing is, with any president, with any world leader, with a religious leader, what you do on paper to me matters a lot more because that's what's going to stay long after you are gone. And in that sense, Pope Francis really didn't do that much for LGBTQ people, for women, etc. And I want to talk about some of these issues because he's getting more credit than I think he deserves. I mean, again, you can give him a little bit of credit, but he's getting way too much for all the wrong reasons. And this is what's bugging me so much. Like, the Catholic Church is really hard to change because it has centuries of dogma piled up, hardened. Even if you're the Pope, you don't get to magically change that in an instant. And if you push to make it slightly less awful, that's nice. But let's all admit then that you just made a teeny tiny little change. It wasn't anything big. And before I get into the specifics, what I keep thinking about is George W. Bush, because he was president when I was old enough to understand a little more about what was going on. You know what I mean? Like, I was cognizant during the presidency of George W. Bush. And what I can tell you as an old person who remembers that presidency is that George W. Bush was awful in pretty much every sense of the word. He didn't do all the crazy shit we're seeing right now from this administration, but he was bad on policy. He surrounded himself with ideologues. He appointed really horrible people to the Supreme Court, things like that. If you were around during his presidency and you were a liberal, you knew that George W. Bush could do no right. You know, whether it was stem cell research, the war in Iraq, things like that. He was a historically awful president, and we're still feeling the repercussions of many of the things he did, specifically on the Supreme Court. But given that Donald Trump is president today, I think a lot of people wrongly look fondly upon George W. Bush as like a silly, goofy uncle of sorts. Like, anytime he shows up at one of those events where a lot of former presidents show up, people treat George W. Bush like this cute, adorable old man who likes to paint, and he doesn't really get involved in politics anymore and things like that. There were billboards during the Trump administration, or like during the 2020 elections, with George W. Bush's face, and they say things like, "Miss me yet?" Like, no, I do not miss you. And if you think, sure, he was conservative, but he was a decent guy, no, he wasn't. And that's the thing that bugs me. How many people seem to imply George W. Bush was conservative, but he was good. He was fundamentally at heart a good person. No, he wasn't. And that's what I get the feeling people are thinking about Pope Francis. Like, okay, the Catholic Church may be a bad institution, but at least he was a good guy at the helm. No, he wasn't. Let's get specific here. Here's where I think he did a good job. When he talked about migrants, immigrants, refugees, he did a nice job of saying, we got to be merciful with them. We got to treat them with kindness and respect. He did the same thing with environmentalism. You know, the Catholic Church is not anti-science the way like fundamentalists or evangelicals are. But he pushed for accepting climate change and taking steps to mitigate that. That is all good. Let's talk about where he was not a champion. What about, sexual abuse in the Catholic Church? Here's an article from NPR. This is from 2018, but check this out. This is after a bishop was accused of abuse. Last week, the Pope accused victims of sexual abuse in Chile of slander, saying their attacks on this bishop amount to calumny because there is not a shred of evidence against him. The day they bring me proof against this bishop, I will speak. Implying that if you don't have concrete evidence this bishop did something to you, shut your damn mouths. And he kind of apologized for that, as you could see in the next paragraph. And he's like, yeah, what I said was a slap in the face to them. I didn't mean it like that. But this is kind of the way he handled sexual abuse. He dismissed it if he didn't think it was warranted. There was an obituary in the New York Times. This is I think, a fair analysis. He adopted new rules to hold top religious leaders, including bishops, accountable if they committed sexual abuse or covered it up, though he didn't impose the level of transparency or civil reporting obligations that many advocates demanded. So, okay, you have some new rules, but if you're asking people outside the Catholic Church, what do we need to do with these people who have been accused? Pope Francis got in the way of that. Just to give you one example, last week, I think I talked about what happens if someone confesses abuse in confession booths and a priest hears it. Should that priest have to report it? The Catholic Church's stance is, no, if they heard it in confession, it stays a secret forever. Even if by telling a law enforcement official about it, we can stop a child from getting attacked, we still got to keep it a secret, says the Catholic Church. The reason that is changing in the state of Washington, specifically in this case, is because secular authorities said, we do not think priests should get a pass for keeping quiet about abuse. We don't give a damn where they heard it. Make them mandatory reporters. The Pope could have said, yeah, we take this stuff seriously, so I agree. It doesn't matter where you heard about the abuse, you still got to report it. Of course, the Pope didn't do that because he had to enforce the dogma that says the act of confession is more important than a child getting molested. That is disturbing to me. What about women? What has he done about women? This is a headline in America Magazine, which is a Catholic magazine, how Pope Francis changed the place of women in the church. It's like, really? Did he? Are women better off because he was there? Well, here's what we know. This is from that same article. There is an increase in the proportion of women who work in the Vatican. Check this out. It went from 17% of people working for the Vatican in 2010. By 2019, it was at 24%. And there was an acceleration in the appointments of women to medium-high positions like undersecretary, because they went from 3 to 8. There are 1 billion Catholics in the world, but, 5 women got some promotions at the Vatican. Yay, ladies. But here's the thing. In all the areas that the Catholic Church actually cares about, priests, bishops, anything higher than that, they are still forbidden. You cannot be a woman and actually be in charge. And if you look at the second paragraph, even in the positions where you can be a woman and hold certain positions in the church, guess what? The Vatican, by and large, still will not give you those jobs. Women remain a minority of employees in the Vatican, and even more so in its leadership. The vast majority, more than 80% of undersecretary and equivalent roles are held by men, primarily clerics, and women's representation shrinks further at the level of secretary and prefect. So again, what has he done for women? He might say, I'll give you a little raise, like at the very bottom of the totem pole of the Catholic Church, and you should, and what? It's not that the Pope was asking for praise, but I feel like people are saying he's been a huge benefit to women in the church. That is just not true unless you think going from like 0 to 1 at the bottom of this chain counts as some huge advancement. Again, if you're a woman and you want to be a priest, sorry, you're out of luck. Catholic Church, including Pope Francis, still says no. What about Ukraine? This one actually surprised me because I totally forgot this happened. What did the Pope say about Ukraine? You might think the Pope said, well, of course, Russia is the aggressor. They need to stop. Whatever, platform I have as the Pope, I'm going to use to condemn Vladimir Putin. That makes sense to me. That is not what this Pope did. This is an article from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. But check this out. Encouraging negotiations to end Russia's war on Ukraine, Pope Francis called for the two sides, the warring sides, to have the courage of the white flag. So he wants them to surrender. Asked whether Ukraine should surrender, and if doing so would legitimize the actions of Russia, the Pope said, well, the strongest one is the one who looks at the situation, thinks about the people, and has the courage of the white flag and negotiates. He is basically implying that Vladimir Zelensky should just say, okay, we'll stop fighting and Russia can have whatever parts of the Ukraine you want. Whatever you've taken over, it's yours. Like, no, that is not how it works. That's not how it should work. And it's horrifying that the Pope is like, just give Russia whatever they want. That's Donald Trump's position on this thing. What the hell? What about the US elections? You might think Pope Francis would say, listen, I'm not trying to tell you all how to vote. Who am I to say that? However, there is one clear candidate that is better in the 2024 election. Is that what he said? Of course, that is not what he said. He falsely claimed both parties were the same because Trump deep down and Kamala Harris openly were against life because Kamala Harris spoke about abortion rights and Trump, I guess, didn't go far enough. And the Pope said, just choose the lesser of two evils. But by not specifying that, you're basically giving conservative Catholics permission to say, well, Kamala Harris supports abortion rights for everybody. That is the bigger evil, so I will vote for Donald Trump. So thanks, Pope. That didn't help. By the way, what Trump is doing right now will probably lead to the unnecessary deaths of millions of people through famine, through revoking aid overseas, through the measles that he's spreading. And by the way, yeah, abortion rates are also going to rise under Trump. So thanks for that. What about abortion? Let me tell you what Pope Francis said about abortion. I think this one has been forgotten since that time. Check this out. Pope Francis says abortion, even of a sick fetus, is like hiring a hitman. That's from 2018. The Pope said people who have abortions are like hitmen. I don't even know where to start with that. He also called the procedure itself, quote, an extremely dangerous crisis of the moral sense. He condemned violence against women in general, which, thanks, that's the least you can do. But also, if you're forcing women to give birth against their will, I would consider that a form of violence against women. Maybe. But the thing that really bugged me is when they said this guy was really good for LGBTQ issues. I mean, obviously, he's not an ally. Obviously, he didn't go as far as, you would hope the Catholic Church could go. But he very specifically was not good for LGBTQ people. And every time there was a headline about something he did that sounded like it could be good, there was always the fine print that you have to look at along the way. Okay? Now, the reason he gets so much credit and praise is because early on, like the first couple months of his papacy, he was asked about discrimination against gays and lesbians going on. And this is what he said at the time. And you've seen different translations of this, I know. If a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge him? And everyone was like, who am I to judge? Wow, the Pope is saying, who am I to cast judgment upon you? Like, well, first of all, he's the Pope. His job is literally casting judgment. So that's a little weird. But this is the thing you got to remember about this Pope. The Pope says everyone can be blessed by the church. I don't care who you are. I'm never going to deny you communion because you do something or believe something that I don't think fits with the Catholic Church. I'm always going to say there is a place for you in the Catholic Church. That's what his message of inclusion was. And that's nice. I mean, I'm sure the Catholic Church is like, yeah, we'll take anyone we can get. So there's no barrier for entry at this point. And that's kind of what the Pope was saying. Who am I to judge? I'm not going to be mad at you if you're gay. However, there are many rules in place when it comes to gay people. But when he said that, and I'm amazed that for the past 10 years plus, that quotation, who am I to judge, has been symbolic of the Pope being open and tolerant of LGBTQ people. But this is maybe the biggest example of this. Check this out. The LGBTQ magazine, The Advocate, that year, 2013, they named Pope Francis their person of the year with a Photoshop like no hate tattoo with the quotation, if someone is gay and seeks the Lord, who am I to judge? They named him their person of the year. this dude is not an ally. What the heck? I mean, that did not age well, but that also didn't age well in the moment. And I want to give you examples of how the Pope has not really been good for LGBTQ people. So the Pope has said in countries that criminalize same-sex actions, because there are countries in like Africa where if they catch you having sex with someone of the same sex, you could be arrested. You could be imprisoned for that. And the Pope said, that's wrong. Great. Thank you. But you know what else he said about gay people? He said kids are better off with heterosexual parents because the last thing we want would be gay parents to have children. You know, Pope Francis, and this is from 2015, he stressed the importance of children having heterosexual parents. Heterosexual marriages not only ensured couples' happiness, you can't be happy when you're gay. What are you talking about? The Pope said, but were deemed essential for good parenting. Gay people, the Pope said, implied, cannot be good parents. That's what this Pope said about gay couples who are raising families. Now, there's another thing he got a lot of press for. He said priests were allowed to bless same-sex couples. And that's a different thing, because usually it's like, you know how sometimes priests say, oh, I'm going to give you communion if you are part of the church. And then, you know, Nancy Pelosi steps up to receive communion and they're like, yeah, you support abortion rights, so no communion for you. And they did that to Joe Biden sometimes as well. And the Pope said, I don't care if they're in a gay marriage. Doesn't bother, like, it's not the issue. They can still be blessed. And people thought, wow, this is a big step in the right direction. However, check out this. This is the headline from the New York Times when this happened. What's the date on this? This is 2023. Pope Francis allows priests to bless same-sex couples. Wow. And then you read some of this fine print. Look at this. The new rule made clear that a blessing of a same-sex couple was not the same as a marriage sacrament. We are not saying they're married. It also stressed it's not blessing the relationship. We don't actually want you two to be together. And that to avoid confusion, blessings should definitely not be given around a civil or same-sex union or when anything suggests there's a wedding going on. So if two gay dudes show up to church, a priest can bless them, but basically, remember, you're just blessing two individuals who are sinners, and we are not acknowledging there's anything happening between these two people. Again, this goes back to the belief that Pope Francis has, which is that anyone can be blessed because we are always trying to increase our body count in the Catholic Church, but also that is not any sort of praise, any sort of acceptance of gay couples. So even in that case, like, he's not doing anything different from blessing two guys who happen to be in line together, one after the other. What about priesthood? Could gay men be priests? I mean, we already know the answer is yes, because there have always been gay men who are priests. And usually the thinking is, well, you can be a priest if you're gay, you just got to be celibate. And that's also what they say to people who are not priests. Like, if you are a Catholic and you are gay, the Catholic Church's dogma and their doctrine says, okay, fine, you're gay. However, don't you dare act on it. That's the Catholic Church's belief. And recently, very, very recently, like literally the beginning of this calendar year, the Vatican approved new rules that said you cannot say no to someone applying to become a priest just because they're gay. And everyone thought that was a big deal. Wow, they're accepting openly gay priests or openly gay people into the priesthood. And that sounds like a step in the right direction. But again, what did the Pope actually say here? What did the Vatican actually say here? According to the rules, the guidelines say that seminary directors should consider sexual orientation as only one aspect of a candidate's personality. To put that another way, the Catholic Church very much still opposes gay people doing anything that's gay. But if you're gay, they said, don't use that as an automatic reason to say, no, you can't be a priest. Just count that the same as drinking. Or like, oh, they have a criminal record. We'll take that into account. but we're not sure yet. Like, it counts as a strike against you, but maybe we're going to look at the other things as well. I don't know. That doesn't sound like a step in like a better direction to say that, okay, being gay is a bad thing, but you know what? We all do bad things. So let's just look at the rest of your resume. I don't know that that's a huge step in favor of LGBTQ people. And then this is actually this is from last year. I don't know if you saw this news. Pope Francis used an offensive slur for gay men in a closed-door discussion with Italian bishops last week, according to two sources. He used an Italian slur that basically amounts to calling a gay person the F word. Like, that's what this Pope did. That's just how he talks behind closed doors with his buddies about gay people. I don't know. I don't feel like I heard a lot of that mention during the obituaries and remembrances this week. I actually like how Frank Bruni of the New York Times put it at the very end of an article all about him, where, look at what he said here. Pope Francis was a man of the church and of his generation, steeped in the bigotries of both. He gave me and many other gay people hope, and then he reminded us of why we never look to his church for our dignity. Like, yeah, you can say that Pope Francis was okay for gay people. Like, he didn't treat being gay as a sin that was worse than other sins, which is kind of like what white evangelicals do. But he definitely still saw it as a sin. And the Catholic Church and what the Catechism of the Catholic Church says about gay people in same-sex relationships, or gay people who have sex with people of the same gender, and what they say about trans people, like, it is still more bigoted than anything you will find on J.K. Rowling's Twitter feed. Speaking of which, what has the Pope said about trans people? Because this one gets even worse. So this is back in 2024. The Vatican released a document about trans people. And again, the Pope signed off on this. This is his position as much as anything else. And what did it say? A transgender identity, the document asserts, seeks to annihilate the concept of nature. The existence of trans people, says the Pope, you are destroying nature. That's where they were at. And actually, he approved this document that was called Infinite Dignity, in which the church said anyone who subscribes to gender theory is making a personal self-determination, which is fancy words for, if you're trans, you made a choice one day to be a different gender than you actually are, which is not how that works. And you would know that if you actually talk to any trans people. That document that, again, the Pope signed off on, also said that sexual difference, the difference between men and women, is the greatest possible difference that exists between living beings. And that's not true. And it denies any sort of gender spectrum. He also said that gender-affirming surgery threatens someone's unique dignity, which is not true, and I would argue has it completely backwards, because those surgeries affirm who you are and affirm your dignity. By his logic, getting LASIK or having an appendectomy, that's also a violation of God's perfect design, because you're altering what God gave you. What else did Francis say about trans people? He said, he actually got credit for this one a lot. He said trans people can be baptized. If you are trans and you go to the Catholic Church and you say, I want to give myself over to God, you can be dunked in the water. Okay, but again, this goes back to the Pope Francis belief that the Catholic Church will always try to increase their body count. They're not affirming who you are. They're not saying being trans is okay. They're saying, we found something with a pulse that wants to be a member of our club. Fine, take their dues immediately. Dunk them in the water, put them on the rolls. We got one. That's the value to them of trans people who want to get baptized. They're not doing it because they're okay with you being trans. So you get the idea. Like, again, I'm not saying he was vindictive. I'm not even saying the Pope was malicious, but the Pope reflected the Catholic doctrine and dogma, and that stuff is awful to LGBTQ people, to women, to victims of sexual abuse. And by and large, the Pope did not change things for the better, even though he got a lot of praise because he was really good at getting people to like him. All right. I also want to point out one other thing, and this is like the atheist side of me. I saw so many people referencing something the Pope did years ago in 2018. And here's the story. I'm going to show you this New York Post headline first, because this is just one version of what I saw everywhere. Tear-jerking moment. Pope Francis consoles boy who asked if his dead atheist dad was in heaven. And it resurfaced after Pope Francis died. And here's basically the story of what happened here. In 2018, the Pope was in a very poor part of Rome. And he was comforting, he was talking to an audience. A lot of kids were in the audience, and he was given a little lecture there. And at some point, he was taking questions from the audience. And this kid had a question. And when the microphone was in his face, the kid really couldn't spit it out. He was sad. And the Pope said, okay, I'm paraphrasing this whole thing. It's a long video and it's in another language. So I'm just going to try to paraphrase. The Pope says, come up here. Tell me what's wrong. Tell me your question. And you could see the kid whispering in the Pope's ear. And the kid is very sad. And afterwards, the Pope sends the kid back to his seat. And he says, with the kid's permission, I'm going to tell you what he asked me. And the kid said, his father recently died. Horrible, traumatic. And his father was a decent guy. He and his siblings were all baptized in the Catholic Church, but his dad was an atheist. And the kid wanted to know, is my dad in heaven? Which, okay, my heart goes out to that child. That's awful. That you have to think that. And the Pope's response was what he was trying to comfort this little boy, but also the Pope is still Catholic. And what the Pope basically said is, this sounds like a good guy. This is a good guy because only a good person, if you're a Catholic believer and you baptized your kids, well, guess what? That's what you're supposed to do. But if you're not a believer and you baptized your kids, that's got to be much harder. So, wow, props to your dad. He was a really good guy. And then the Pope asked the audience of children, does God abandon his children when they are good? And the audience of kids screams out, no. And the Pope says, there you go, kid. That's your answer. God does not abandon kids, does not abandon people who are good. So I'm sure your father's doing okay in the afterlife. And that is why he got praised. He's like, wow, he really comforted this child. Granted, we did not see interviews with the child after this to find that out. But here's the problem with what the Pope said. There is an implication that the father's life was not valuable to God on its own. The only reason the Catholic God was cool with this guy is because he baptized his kids. Why did he baptize his kids? I don't know. Maybe his mother-in-law was like, you better baptize my grandkids. Maybe his wife said the exact same thing. I don't know why he baptized my kids, but I'll tell you what, I'm an atheist and my kids sometimes go to a temple. Why? It's not because I'm pushing for it. You know what I mean? Sometimes you got to keep the peace. But that's the only reason this kid's dad was good? Are you kidding me? That's a horrible answer. Have you ever, as an atheist, heard a Christian apologist try to butter you up when they're trying to say, this atheist asks a very good question and I'm going to answer it. And guess what? Me and this atheist, we have actually a lot in common because I also do not believe there is a God with a white beard who sits on a cloud. So we both don't believe in that God. And then they go into their spiel and it's so condescending because it's like, dude, we don't believe in that either. We're talking about a deity who answers your prayers. That's the one we don't believe in. But that's what I got from this Pope. It was like a very weird answer that if you look at it without thinking about Catholic dogma, that's kind of a shitty answer. And also, why do you think the kid was so sad in the first place? Why did he think there was a chance his dad might be burning in hell despite being a good guy? That's because he was raised as a Catholic. And the church scared him into thinking that his amazing dad, who died so young, might be punished for eternity because of whatever, because he had thoughts, because he, challenged the notion of God. That's a bad look for the church. So I don't know. That answer is not great. We should be furious at the people who lied to that boy about hell, not praising the guy who swears the boy's father avoided it because he let his kids get dunked in water. All right. So I don't know. I'm not saying the Pope was evil. I'm just saying he doesn't deserve all the praise he's getting. Now, one thing to think about. I have heard some people say, well, the next Pope is going to be like super conservative because you can only go down from here, right? And the truth is, this Pope, according to Religion News Service, there are 135 cardinals who will vote for the next Pope. You need 2/3 of the vote. Well, Pope Francis installed, he handpicked 108 of the 135 cardinals, which means the Pope handpicked a supermajority of his people to succeed him. They're the ones that are going to vote. So odds are, if he handpicked you to be a cardinal, you probably are aligned with Pope Francis in the first place. So the odds that his handpicked people are going to choose someone who's going to move the church in a ridiculously conservative place, that doesn't seem very likely. Now, you could also wonder, maybe they're going to ignore that. Maybe it's not about presenting the church as a tolerant, inclusive place, which isn't happening, but they like the image. Maybe they're thinking strategically, Catholicism isn't really growing in the United States, but man, is it growing in Africa. And in Africa, they really don't like LGBTQ people. But screw it. Let's elect the next Pope from Africa in the hopes that we can do more outreach there. And then maybe they don't care. Because again, Pope Francis's legacy is that he doesn't care about LGBTQ people anything more than these are people who might count as bodies in the pews. They can be butts in our seats. That's what they're good for. But beyond that, he doesn't want to do anything for them. And the Catholic Church doesn't either. So we'll see. The next Pope isn't going to change Catholic doctrine in any meaningful way. And the best that Pope Francis did, really, is he upset some of the traditionalists because he didn't really go all in on, he wasn't trying to go out of his way to be an asshole to people. But if you look on paper at what he did, by and large, that is kind of what his policies were. Still, predictably so. Okay, I hope that made sense. What questions do we have here? That's my little Pope rant. I think he was not as bad as your average Pope, but that's very far from an endorsement. I agree with that. And I think the thing I wish more coverage would explain is, in what way was he not as bad as the average Pope? Because I think the average Pope would have done a lot of the same policies, because I don't really think Pope Francis made a dent in these things that really needed to change. So how was he less worse than like Pope Benedict? He came off like a happy grandpa rather than a stern old disciplinarian. And I think people like the guy who smiles on camera. I mean, that's where he wasn't as bad. He looked better on camera. He sounded like a guy who exuded some empathy. If you look at his biography, coming from a middle-class family, working to alleviate poverty, that is wonderful. He's not coming from the ivory towers. He's not coming from a place where he's wanted to be Pope since he was a fetus. He's a guy who fell into this position later in life, and he's like, all right, what can I do with this? And again, there are parts of what he did, environmentalism, things like that, where, yeah, he was good. But on issues he's getting credit for, no, he wasn't better for LGBTQ people. He's not great for women, things like that. As someone is saying in the comments, the bar is low, and he barely cleared it. Even in LGBT subreddits, there's been this whitewashing of how progressive Francis was. I felt like I was going nuts. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing too. It's the whitewashing of what he did. No one is mentioning the things he did not do. No one is mentioning the fine print that came with the things he got headlines for. It is so annoying. I heard an obit where they called him the People's Pope. Don't they say that about every pope? I feel like they did not say that about Pope Benedict. John Paul II, sure. Pope Benedict was just, yeah, we're kind of all glad he's gone because he wasn't fun. And that's it. I'm sure that following Pope Sidious V helped get him a bit of a pass. That's it. In hindsight, compared to the alternative, the guy who looks good on paper, like, they say this about Republicans all the time. Every time you hear the words like moderate Republican, it bugs me to no end because, again, on paper, they're all horrible. Their policies all suck. But because they're not going out there being dicks to everybody they meet, they're like, well, this one's a moderate. Like, no, that person's also an extremist. They just know how to work in front of a camera a little better. Anyone here have favorites among the papal contenders? I've read one NBC article and kind of hope they pick Cardinal Zuppi. Honestly, right now, I don't know who the better choices would be because, one, it's very much a guessing game. I don't know where they're leaning. I don't know if they're thinking strategically to get bigger numbers. I don't know if they're trying to make the Catholic Church a more welcome club for people who may not be part of it. But they're going to have weeks to kind of discuss it privately. And we joked about this earlier, but if you've seen the movie Conclave, you are all experts at this now. So everyone's like, oh, I know how they do this. Let me tell you who they're going to pick. But I don't know who's going to be a better option. I don't necessarily know right now, like this person's going to be better than that one. Because right now they all kind of just seem the same. Anyone else get an unsolicited copy of The Great Controversy in the mail today? I did not, and I don't even know what you're talking about, Robin, and now I have questions. Feel like it was specifically sent out in response to his death. I don't know what that is. I'm very curious. All right, we're going to jump to a different story. I swear they're not all this long. All right, let me pull up some other stuff here. We're going to go to a happier story. I just closed 72 tabs. Good for me. All right. Ooh, let's talk about this. We're going to get some videos out of the way here. Okay. Oklahoma Republicans recently, they just passed a resolution proclaiming that Christ is king. That's what they've been working on this week. And I'm not even kidding. This is the resolution they already passed. And you could see a couple things here. It's resolution number 1013. It was sponsored by this guy, Shane Jett, in the state Senate of Oklahoma. And there's a lot of whereas clauses, but look at this. Whereas the state of Oklahoma has a rich history rooted in faith, resilience, and a commitment to values that uplift its people. And it goes on, and it says the phrase Christ the King represents a declaration of faith for millions of Oklahomans and Christians worldwide, symbolizing the sovereignty of Jesus as a source of hope, unity, and moral guidance. Which, I don't know, guys, when I think of Christians in the United States, the word unity is not the first thing that comes to mind. But then at the very end of this, what do they actually say here? All right. After we do the whereas clauses, we proclaim that the Oklahoma State Legislature hereby proclaims Christ is King. Our state legislature says Christ is King, recognizing the spiritual significance of this declaration to many of its citizens and honoring the role of faith in the history and culture of Oklahoma. Okay, that sounds like something you should do in a church and not the legislature. It also says, listen, guys, fine print, so don't sue us. This resolution is not intended to establish any religion or infringe upon the rights. Yeah. No one was saying this is infringing on our rights. but it is very much establishing a state religion. That's what this resolution is doing. So this is what they passed. The bill was introduced, and normally to get anything passed, you would think, how long does it take to get a bill passed? Like months? They introduced this resolution and got it passed in 2 days. Every Republican voted for it. Every Democrat opposed it. And the sponsor of this bill, Shane Jett, he was explaining himself to a local news reporter. This is what he said. It's just a very warm, inspirational way to honor Christ and to recognize his role in the foundation of the nation and the important role that he plays in the hearts of Oklahomans all over. What's the big deal, you guys? He says it's just a proclamation, but others believe it lays the groundwork of a much broader agenda, which is a very both sides reporting sort of way of saying, yeah, it's a proclamation, but we very much know this is just setting the grounds so that they can do some real Christian nationalist shit. So here's the thing about Democrats, though, in Oklahoma. They do not have the votes to stop this sort of thing. But anytime you're trying to pass anything, resolution, a bill, there is time to discuss and debate the stuff, even if it feels like a waste of time because they're going to pass it anyway. And this is what I appreciate. When I was watching the debate over this particular resolution, a bunch of Democrats spoke out against it, and they spoke out for different reasons. Some people just were against the church-state separation aspect. Some people said this is just alienating the diverse people we have in our state. Like, they all gave their own reasons for not liking it. I want to play for you some clips from some of the Democrats who spoke out. One of them is a guy named, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Andy Fugate. And his question was, hey, there's the sponsor of the bill. His name is Jim Olsen. Jim Olsen kind of held the floor here. And so Andy was like, I got a question for you, Jim, the guy who sponsored this bill. Are you aware of what Christians have done in the state of Oklahoma in our state's history? Because the history of Oklahoma includes Native American tribes. And when Christians enter land that is already settled on by Native Americans, things have not ended well historically. And in the case of Oklahoma, we're talking about boarding schools where Christians took over. They brought Native American kids to those buildings. They forced them to assimilate, things like that. And a lot of times those kids have died. And so that first clause of the resolution says the state of Oklahoma has a rich history rooted in faith, resilience, and a commitment to values that uplift its people. And so let me play for you this clip from Andy Fugate.
Are you aware of the religious schools that were taxpayer funded in the territorial days of Oklahoma and the atrocities that were perpetrated upon Indian children, tribal children, in the name of Jesus?
I was not aware of that. I'm not certain how that relates to the resolution, though.
I have no clue what you're talking about, but also, guys, come on. We're just passing a resolution that says Jesus is amazing. So I don't know why you telling me Jesus is not amazing. What does that have to do with this bill? It's just a dumb answer and a very ignorant one, because I don't care who you are. If you're a legislator in Oklahoma, you should know what Christians did historically in your state. That's like saying, what, the Tulsa Race Massacre? I don't know what you're talking about. There's no discrimination in our state. Like, how do you not know? It's kind of one thing your state is definitely known for. So again, that Democrat was not the only one who spoke out against this. There was another representative, Michelle McCain, who spoke out and said, you know, if you wanted to honor Christians in our state, I would be fine with that, she said, because cool, those are a lot of my constituents too. But she said, I am not in favor of this pro-Christianity resolution because that is not what we should be doing here. By the way, you will hear this in her speech. She makes a side reference, a small, subtle reference to her being an atheist. And I asked some, people I work with, I'm like, did you know she was an atheist in Oklahoma? And they're like, had no idea. So we only know this person is an atheist because she said it right here during the debate, outing herself in a way. But what she said is amazing. If you don't know this woman, check her out. She's pretty amazing here. This is
Thank you,
McCain.
Mr. Speaker. I'm standing up against this resolution not because I happen to be an atheist and disagree with the resolution itself. I would actually gladly support a resolution to acknowledge Christian contributions to our state's history, especially if we would be truthful about some of the things that it has contributed to, which are not positive. And to my colleagues who want to operate from a place of Scripture, Romans 13 says everyone must submit to governing authorities. For all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. So for starters, I do appreciate that your God apparently placed me here. I'm grateful for that, so that I can also tell you that the Constitution requires a separation of church and state. And according to the scripture of the God that the representative says he wants to acknowledge in this resolution, we are to follow the governing authority of this country. I would gladly support and debate in favor of a resolution to acknowledge the Christian citizens in our state, to acknowledge their contributions and even their beliefs. What I do not believe is appropriate for us as a government body is to stand here and declare that one specific belief is the highest above all others. And also, we are a democracy and do not even have kings. So again, inappropriate. It's a waste of time and resources. It has wasted taxpayer funds by having our legal department even type it up. And so I encourage all of you to vote no on this and to also report this to Doge.
Love the sarcasm at the end. Tell Elon about this. It's a waste of resources. It's not efficient. I also appreciate that she pointed out, why are we doing a resolution that says Christ is king? We shouldn't be acknowledging like Christ's superiority. That's not our position. And also, we're a democracy. Why are we acknowledging anyone is king? That's not how this works. The sarcasm, I love it. It's fantastic. So love her. She's great. I want to see more of her. And then you had another person speaking who is Representative Mickey Dolan's, who has been fighting these battles for years now. So he knows what he's talking about. He came prepared with receipts. He was ready to make the link between this resolution and Christian nationalism, saying this bill elevates religion over non-religion. It elevates Christianity above other religions, and really pointing out how awful this particular bill is. This is Mickey Dolan's here.
Today, I rise to amplify the voices of Christians across Oklahoma who recognize this resolution as rooted in Christian nationalism, which we know is not a religion, but a political ideology that is rooted in power, control, and intrusion. I also rise to amplify the voices of our Jewish friends, of our Hindu friends, our Buddhist friends, and agnostics and atheists. What we are doing here is more than a symbolic gesture. We are elevating one religion over another to tell the other 1,000 recognized religions by the IRS that you're not as important as Christianity and as Christians. In a way, you're making them second-class citizens. Mr. Speaker, we are a democracy, not a theocracy, but that is exactly where we are headed, and I would contend that Oklahoma is already there.
Beautifully put, making all the right statements right there. My favorite thing he said, though, came elsewhere in his speech, because he asked the guy who's one of the sponsors of this bill, hey, would you support a resolution that says Allah is supreme? Something like that, since you're saying this resolution is not promoting Christianity, we're just honoring Christians, really. Well, we have Muslims in Oklahoma, like there are at least a few. So why not? Would you support a resolution saying that? And I want you to listen. I want you to first see the Republican's face after he asked that question, and then listen to the pause as the Republican thinks about what to say here, and then listen to the Republican's answer. It's a short clip, but try to catch all of this.
Speaker, Representative, in the spirit of fairness and equality, would you also support a similar resolution declaring Allah is supreme?
That's not addressed in this resolution, so I'll decline to answer that one.
It's not in the text in front of me, so I can't answer that. Go away. Stop asking me about other people. I do not care. Like, my God. It's so obvious what they're doing. I will also show you, not the full speech, but this is what the head of the Oklahoma Democrats said after this all happened. We spent over an hour on the House floor today. Did not solve a single problem for everyday Oklahomans, said House Democratic leader Cindy Munson. We did not help ease financial burden for working families. We didn't do anything to help Oklahomans who need housing and health care. What the Republican supermajority did today was politicize personal, deeply held religious beliefs. This religion does not solve problems. It's pandering. Oklahomans want us focused on improving our state and focused on the issues that will do that, which is fine. It's not exactly rolling off the tongue. It doesn't actually get to the heart of why these people are doing it, which is, here's my fear. This resolution has no bearing on the law. It's symbolic. However, when you start passing these symbolic resolutions, and then later on, you have Ryan Walters, the Oklahoma superintendent of public instruction, who says, well, I just want to get a Bible in every classroom. And they're like, well, on what basis are you going to try to get a Bible in every classroom? He's going to be like, well, we just passed a resolution that says our state recognizes Christ as king. And so who are you to tell me I can't put a Bible? Like, that's how they use these symbolic things. They use it so that it becomes tradition, so that down the road they can shove Christianity in all of our faces legislatively. That's why this stuff is not just a, resolution. It's not just symbolic. They're laying the groundwork so that they could shove Christianity in all of our faces later on. And I wish Democrats would just say that instead of arguing, well, we should have been doing something better for the people. Like, yeah, you should. But the reason this piece of legislation is bad, don't just ignore that they were the biggest problem with this resolution is not that it's a waste of time. It's that it's a genuinely awful resolution that sets the stage for more awful things to come. And nobody should be in the business of getting the government to promote Christianity. I will also say that Mickey Dolan, who you saw speaking at the end there, and the other lawmaker, Michelle McCain, they also did a little bit of a press conference like earlier this week outside the Oklahoma Capitol, where they said the same stuff to whoever was willing to listen. You could see that on social media for Mickey Dolan's if you Google that. And one last thing to point out, then I'll be done here. No one really acknowledged something that has been noted, but a lot of right-wing extremists online have kind of hijacked the phrase Christ is king to represent white supremacy, anti-Semitism. I'm not saying the Oklahoma lawmakers were trying to do that, but I am saying, like, really, do you guys know why this particular phrase is being promoted? This is a presentation from a Christian group that's saying, you guys should all know when you say this, it has a different connotation depending on which circles you're in. And I don't know why Jordan Peterson is on that list right there, but there you go. But that phrase has been used by some very, very horrible people online. And I feel like Republicans should at least acknowledge that if they don't want to be associated with that. But okay, I'm going to stop there. They passed that bill in Oklahoma. It is frustrating. What questions we got here? Not them using their power to publish fan fiction to a captive audience. Don't they have an education system to fix? Sorry, you're talking about the state that is ranked 49th in the nation, and their solution, thanks to Ryan Walters, is let's get more Bibles in schools. Like, this is not a state where the Republicans care about education, and Democrats don't have enough power to fix things. Yeah, some of the folks in my state, Texas's legislature, are just straight up doing busy work, making up crap bills about culture war issues. Get to work. You know what? I'll take some issue with that. There are definitely Republicans passing symbolic, pointless pieces of legislation or resolutions. However, the Republicans in Texas also pass plenty of bills that do a lot of damage. I think I just read this week, they just pushed for like $1 billion private school plan. That's money that's going to come out of the public school system so that people can send their kids to private religious schools. So these voucher programs. And so they did pass that. So it's not just made up crap bills about culture war issues. It's also very real bills about very real issues, and they're all going to hurt people of Texas. One more time, what was this woman's name? The woman who was speaking, the Democrat who was speaking there was Michelle McCain, MCCANE. Want to make sure I get that right. MCCANE, Michelle McCain. Seems fantastic. I'm kind of mad I didn't know anything about her before I was researching this story. I just closed 72 tabs. My ADHD just had a heart attack. You might need one of those. A heart attack? Oh, don't worry. It's coming. Seventh-day Adventist book. Oh, that's the book that they were sending out in the last story after the Pope's death. I haven't read the book. I did not get that. And I'm kind of sad. I am sad that religious organizations are not sending me their material because I feel like I've earned it. All right, I'm going to jump to another story. You're all going to sign up for the newsletter. Let me see. Oh my God, do I have a happy story for you? I might have a happy story for you. Okay, one second. By the way, at the end of the stories I'm going to talk about, Den's going to pull up a bunch of tweets, and I know I've tweeted about a lot of weird things over the past week, so I'll have some quick running commentary on all of that. I want to give you an update on a story I talked about, like, I don't know if it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but here's the story I talked about. A couple weeks ago, a public high school district in Arizona, they signed a contract to build a Mormon seminary on campus. And the thing about Mormon seminary is that Mormons really want kids to get indoctrinated into their religious beliefs. And they know a lot of kids start questioning their faith in middle school and high school and beyond. And since they got to go on their mission trips after high school, it's like, well, we got to get you in the fold real soon. And so, if you know any Mormon kids, they probably have to go to seminary, religious indoctrination class. And sometimes when they're enrolled in a public school, it's like, well, when do you have time to take these classes? Because they do not do it just on Sunday mornings. No, these classes might take place every day of the week. So they might go really early before school. They might leave the school for released time in the middle of the day, go to a local Mormon temple, get their education, religious education, and then come back to school. And so the story we talked about recently is that in the Vail Unified School District near Tucson, Arizona, at Cienega High School, the Mormon Church came to the school board and said, you have some space on your high school campus. We will pay like $500,000 to build a tiny little building in this area. And then we'll gift it to you. We'll pay for the building and we'll give it to you. And in return, you will use it. You will rent it out to whoever wants it. And we, the Mormon Church, will pay for a 10-year lease on the building that we are going to build for you. So they're going to pay for the building. They're going to lease it out for 10 years from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every school day. And the reason they were doing that is they said there's a lot of Mormons in this area. And instead of making them drive like 15 minutes away and then another 15 back, leaving them with like 10 minutes to learn religious education, they said, if we're just on your campus, we'll have a lot more time for religious education classes. So let us do this. And the school board was like, that sounds awesome. And they signed the contract. And the things that contract said were, you will build the building. We will lease it out to you for 10 years. Your rent will be a whopping $100 a month, which is way lower than what you and I would pay for if we wanted to rent space on their campus. The Mormon Church would pay $500 for like maintenance and utilities and getting the janitors to clean up the building and all that stuff. The Mormon Church said, we want 4 parking spaces right next to the building. And so that means teachers cannot use all that stuff. Students cannot use the parking spots. And the school board signed off on this. And no one in the community knew what had happened until the contract was already signed. And they were furious. And there were local news reports about this. And you had people saying, one, why weren't we informed about all this as this was being discussed? Because apparently it had been in the works for like 13 years, but no one ever said anything. And also church-state separation. Why are you allowing a religious group to have its own building on campus? Like, what happens if the Satanic Temple decides to do a Kickstarter to do the same thing? Are you going to allow any religious group to just build whatever they want on campus? And how come they're getting a sweetheart deal when it comes to rent? Like, none of this makes any sense. All of this feels really illegal. And it is bizarre that all of you are going all in on this, right? And in terms of the legal problems, there's a group called Secular Arizona. And I mentioned this in my last video. They wrote a letter to the school board, basically a cease and desist letter, basically saying, we know you signed the contract, but if you go through with this, we have grounds to sue the school district and we will win because the law is on our side. Not only for the church-state separation stuff, but specifically, Arizona's constitution has something called a Blaine Amendment, which says no public money, no public resources can be used to promote religion. And you are doing that by building a Mormon center on campus. So, like, we're gonna sue you if you go through with this. I know the contract is signed, but, like, get out of it. That's what Diane Post, the lawyer for Secular Arizona, wrote to them. And in addition to calling out the Blaine Amendment and the church-state separation stuff, she said fair market value to rent out this space should be closer to $27,000 a year, not $1,200, which is what the Mormon Church is paying. By the way, you can't just give away parking spots. Those are for the community, things like that. And the other thing that was pointed out, not just by Diane Post, but by a lot of people in the community, is that why isn't the Mormon Church doing at this school district what the Mormon Church does in a lot of places around the country, especially if there's a lot of Mormons in one place, which is just build something near the campus, like off the school property, but like across the street or nearby. Why don't you just build something there? And then students who want to, and then it's not a church-state separation issue. But why do you have to be on campus? That's not right. So she wrote a letter. Diane Post of Secular Arizona did. The Freedom from Religion Foundation wrote a letter that said this is clearly illegal. It's favoring students who are members of the Mormon Church. And I told you this was a happy story, right? Here's why. On Tuesday, April 22nd, this is what the school district posted on Facebook. Dear Vail parents, staff, and greater community, here's an update. Look at the next paragraph. Yesterday, we met with representatives of the Mormon Church to discuss the status of the agreement. Earlier this evening, we received formal written notice from the church indicating their decision to exercise their contractual rights to terminate the agreement. The Mormon Church went to the school district and said, you know what, I know we signed the contract and all, but let's rip it up. We no longer want a building on your campus. In short, this action by the church brings the lease and donation agreement to a close. And then some other crap. So the deal is off. And the Mormon Church is the group. They got everything they wanted. Sweetheart deal. They got the space. They got everything they could have wanted because the school district officials are too dumb to realize they are breaking the law here. And the Mormon Church went to the school board and said, yeah, we're going to call backsies on this. We don't want it. Here's the reverse Uno card. Why? Why did they suddenly make a switch after they got everything they wanted? I don't know. I have a couple ideas. So a couple things about the school district's message. First of all, there was no apology in that message. There was no mention that they screwed up, that they did anything wrong, that the contract should never have been signed in the first place. Nothing like that. The school board did not acknowledge the legal threats and the letters they got saying, if you go through with this, we are going to sue you. They did not mention that at all. There's no mention that the school board members have any clue they screwed up. So why shouldn't I think you're just going to do this again in the future, right? But one of the reasons I think the Mormon Church felt jittery about all this is because about a week ago, after stories about this agreement got on the local news, were written about by myself and others, there was so much backlash that the superintendent of this district said, hey, community, I'm going to hold a public meeting to answer your questions about this. And so many people showed up to complain about it all. This is from a local newspaper about it all. Retired teachers, residents, and parents of students and former students said they felt enraged, frustrated, and disenfranchised with how the agreement with the church was carried out. Caruth, who's the superintendent, told them that while the agreement with the church has been signed, the district is functionally in a pause state as far as moving forward with design or construction of any of the things. So, like, don't be mad at us. We haven't done anything yet, even though the contract is signed and we totally will. What? He said there was something else in this article as well. Where did it go? Here we go. Throughout the almost 3-hour meeting, the superintendent, Caruth, apologized to the public for how the agreement between the district and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was pursued and executed. He said that he underestimated the public's concern. Really? Maybe you didn't ask. He said he will bring back the concerns to the board, which is also engaging with the church and the district's legal advisors about how to proceed. So this dude is like a Republican holding a town hall meeting, and everyone's pissed off. And they're like, what? You're all mad? But don't you love Elon? And this is the first time they're hearing no one likes anything they're doing. And so that was huge. You have all these community members, not atheists, by the way, not just atheists, but you had a lot of community members speaking out against it. They cited church-state separation, by the way. They did not buy the argument that the district's lawyers looked at all of this and they said, everything's cool. They're like, I think we need new lawyers. And also Secular Arizona's lawyer, Diane Post, she sent a follow-up letter to the district saying, I heard what your lawyers have said in response to what I pointed out, and they're still wrong, and I want to tell you why you're still going to lose if this case ends up in court. But the Mormon Church hasn't said anything yet. We don't know why they canceled the contract. Did they do it because, and this is just a theory on my end, do they think, wow, there's a lot of backlash to this already, and if we build this building on campus, people are just going to not like the Mormon Church, and we are far better off just canceling this contract, trying to maintain some goodwill, and we'll just try to build a building across the street maybe. Is that why? Because the backlash convinced them that maybe this wasn't worth it, even though the price was good? I don't know. I wish we knew. I did ask Secular Arizona, hey, so you guys got what you wanted. What did you say in response? Jean Castine, who's their executive director, she told me, we are proud of the tireless legal work led by Diane Post and our legal team that made this reversal happen. And then Diane Post said to me, this is a public high school, not a platform for religious proselytizing. We had to act, and we did. So that is awesome. But just to point out, in all of this, the board members of this school district, they failed. Their lawyers failed. The superintendent failed. And the Mormon Church was ready to pounce on the district's ignorance. And they got everything they wanted. But then the people who understand church-state separation began to speak up, and they got this thing canceled. That is incredible. I did not think that was going to happen. But sometimes when you fight, I know Rachel Maddow has said this for weeks now, sometimes when you fight, you actually win. And this is a win for everybody in that community, including the Mormons, whether they like it or not. If they want to go to religious education class at some point during the day or before school, they still can. Just find the local Mormon temple or tell the temple, they have enough money in the Mormon Church, tell them to build a place across the street. That's fine. All right, I'm going to stop there with this story. What questions do we have here? The Mormons have some really good lawyers, but it sounds like they got a bit too greedy with this one. Not as familiar with Arizona state law as they are Utah's. Maybe. Again, I have to think the Mormon Church knew this might be illegal, but they thought we can get away with it. But everything I've heard from the school district makes it sound like they had no clue this would be a problem, which tells you a lot about that school board. To be clear, the land is the expensive part, not the building. So the fact that LDS was going to build the building and donate it wasn't a significant enticement. Yeah, they were going to get this land on the campus and they could do kind of whatever they needed to during 12 hours a day. That's a lot of kids you can lure in. The Mormon church in my city is trying to take over the school board. They run for election for school board. This is something that happens with evangelical churches too. Sometimes they try to take over a school board. Sometimes they try to take over a city council. And there's nothing illegal about that. There's not like a law, nor should there be, that says, Mormons are not allowed to run for office. That would be wrong. I am against that. But what's scary is the only reason they want to do it in a lot of these cases where they're running as a slate of candidates from a particular church is because it's never for good reasons. It's always because they're like, we want to ban books. So let's get all the evangelicals in this community for us this way. That's where it gets scary. I don't care if there's a whole board full of religious people. Just like I don't care if the president is religious. I want to know what they're going to do about that. And generally speaking, Democrats are not going to try to shove their religion in your face. Republicans absolutely are. You know what I mean? So same thing. I don't know that I have a problem with Mormons trying to take over the school board. I still want to know what is it that you're trying to change that needs to change, and then we'll vote accordingly. All right, LDS estimated net worth is $290 billion. Can't they build their own church? Church is not what you wrote. I mean, yes, they have the money to do it, but you realize if they build anything, that might take away from the $290 billion. I don't get this about rich people. Like, they could do so much stuff. They could give away all the money they want, and they'll always have plenty, if not more than they started with. And yet, those are the stingiest people who never want to do anything to help the public, often. Again, this isn't a money thing. The Mormon church can do whatever it wants. And in this case, what they wanted was to build something on a public high school campus. They didn't have to do that. They chose to do that. And only now they're backing out and they won't tell anyone why. All right, I'm going to jump to a different story here. All right, this is going to feel like deja vu. I swear it's not. It's a different story. So I talked about earlier in this live stream, I talked about Oklahoma passing a resolution that says Christ is king. Well, one of the things they said in that resolution in Oklahoma is that we are doing this, passing this Christ is king resolution, because we want to recognize the spiritual significance of this declaration to many of its citizens. We want to do this because so many people in Oklahoma are Christians, and we're doing this for them. And that was a horrible resolution for all the reasons I talked about already. But apparently, they were nuanced in a way that the people in Indiana are not. Because in Indiana, they just proposed a resolution. This is the lady who's doing it, Joanna King. She's a Republican in the state house. She just proposed a resolution, House Resolution 53. And I'm going to skip for a second these whereas clauses and jump to the meat of this. What is it that House Resolution 53 would do? Let's see. Let me jump up here. Be it resolved by the House of Representatives of Indiana, 1, that the Indiana House of Representatives acknowledges the need for divine providence, choosing to humbly submit its ways to the Lord Jesus Christ. The entire Indiana House is like, we all need the help of Jesus, because otherwise we don't know what we're doing here. We're just Republicans. What do you expect? Section 2 is even worse, that the Indiana House of Representatives is unified in its steadfast commitment to individually and corporately, returning to God and upholding the biblical principles set forth in the Word of God. I think the part of that is bugging me the most is unified, because there are Democrats in the Indiana House, at least a couple. They're not going to vote for this, I would think. which means if you pass this resolution and the vote's like, I don't know, 60-4, you're not unified. You're lying in the text of the resolution. Do you not understand that? But like the thing I was trying to point out is in Oklahoma, they said we're doing this Christ is King resolution because we want to honor most of the people in our state, many of the people in our state. This resolution is like every single person in the Indiana House says Jesus is Lord. It's like they just did away with all the nuance completely. There's no room for dissent, which is weird. And then that's just this part of the document. Let's look at those whereas clauses, because this is the justification for why they are doing this. Whereas the founding fathers of the United States, compelled by a unified desire for peace and the freedom to pursue righteousness, sought a better way. Okay. Whereas these founders, relying on biblical principles as the moral authority to guide their character, upheld a standard for the common good of all. Like this goes on for a while. The founders wanted to base a government on the laws of nature and of nature's God. That's from the Declaration of Independence, but that is very much not saying that like we here, we, the founders, we all worship Jesus. Like that is not what they said. This is what you write if it's several hundred years ago and you don't know what evolution is and you just have like a deistic God that you kind of pray to because you don't know any better. By the way, Thomas Jefferson was one of the authors, if not the author, of the Declaration of Independence, and he famously did not buy into the miracles of Jesus. Just go look up the Jefferson Bible on Wikipedia, see what you find. So like all of these whereas clauses are just gaslighting us about the nature of the founding fathers. They were not all Christians. The ones who were not the same type of Christians as the ones in Indiana today. So this idea that all we're doing is acknowledging what the founders did years ago, that's a lie. And this idea that Indiana is entirely unified in all this is a lie. And all of this goes against the state's law. I mean, this is from a local newspaper article about all this. Representative King, this is from, I think, Ryan Jane. Yeah, Ryan Jane, who's an attorney with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Representative King is sending a clear message to her non-Christian constituents that she does not see them as full Americans. This is Christian nationalism, and it runs counter to the principles of the U.S. Constitution and the Indiana Constitution. And Jane also zeroed in the resolution's invocation of the Founding Fathers, which he said perpetuates the myth that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. All of that is accurate. And he points out that it runs counter to the U.S. and Indiana Constitution. Yeah, the Indiana Constitution has a law that says no preference shall be given to any creed, religious society, or mode of worship. No preference. So Indiana has its own law that says a resolution like this is illegal. Again, this is not a thoughtless resolution, as I said in Oklahoma too. It is deeply un-American, but why are they doing this? Indiana Republicans are doing this because they are setting the stage to make it easier for future Republicans to pass legislation using the argument that this is what Jesus wanted. And in this state, as we said in our resolution, we do whatever Jesus wants. That's why they're doing this stuff. It's not that this resolution will change anything necessarily. It's that it will make it easier for them to say, you know, gay people don't have rights in Indiana because that's what the Bible requires. And we know that because in this state, we honor what the Bible says. That's their logic here. By the way, the lady who sponsored this bill, Joanna King, if you don't know who that one is, she is one of the most transphobic members of the state legislature. She has introduced a bill to allow children as young as 14 years old to drop out of school so they can do labor on their farms. So she's pro-child labor. And she also supported a bill to end same-sex marriage. So if there is a gay couple in the state of Indiana, she wants to take away their marriage license and rip it up. Like cruelty and bigotry have just defined her career. So promoting Christianity is just a natural next step for people like her. I will say that in Oklahoma, they passed the resolution in the House. Right now, this Indiana resolution has not passed. It's currently sitting in the Committee on Courts and Criminal Code, and there has been no scheduling of when they're going to discuss this bill or anything like it. But the fact that it's even suggested tells you something about their priorities, and that should be disturbing by itself. All right, I'm going to stop there with this story. What questions do we have here? Congrats to Oklahoma for being more subtle and sophisticated and nuanced than Indiana. I know we don't get to say it often, but in this case, it's true. Oklahoma's Christian nationalist legislation was more thoughtful than the one we just saw in Indiana's, somehow. How can Christianity be unified with about 100,000 sects to it, including Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Catholics, etc.? Right. They're all unified in that they just all really hate progressive Christians. Like, yeah, they don't recognize the irony in their own statement. All right, I'm going to jump to another story here. Give me a second. Okay, I'm going to get right into it. This is a fascinating story. Have you ever seen this before? This is the Christian flag. It's a symbol. Christians, conservative Christians, Christian nationalists, they like flying this thing wherever they can. And recently, this became a big deal in Hartford, Connecticut, because just before Easter, they were like, why don't, someone requested that they put up a Christian flag outside City Hall. And the city council members are like, that sounds great. And a couple of city council members are like, wait. You know, there are laws against doing this, right? Like, we can't just put up a Christian flag outside City Hall. And this is what they were debating before Easter. And I will give you an update on this, but let me tell you what happened. Like, when they were discussing this, this was a resolution that was offered a couple of weeks ago in Hartford. And you can see it's sponsored by members of the city council. And they say, I'm going to remove myself here if I can. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Court of Common Council of the City of Hartford authorizes the raising of the Christian flag at City Hall on April 17th, which is a week ago, a week as I'm making this video, but it was a couple days before Easter Sunday. So the plan was they would raise this flag outside City Hall for like a long weekend and then take it down. And they said in the whereas clause right above my head here, why are we doing this? To recognize the contributions of the Christian community and the many organizations that support our residents, which is all bullshit. No one cares about that. They just wanted to put up this Christian flag. Now, as with any resolution, there was some discussion about it before they proceeded to vote on this issue. And any council members who wanted to speak up could do it. And this is where it got interesting. One of the people who spoke out against this resolution was a council member named Joshua Michtum. And he spoke and he basically argued, like, he's a lawyer and he's Jewish. And he was actually really tactful in how he tried to tell his colleagues this is a really bad idea. He said, it is disrespectful for those of us on city council to put up this flag because we, the elected government, we are a far less accomplished and respectable group than the Christian groups themselves. So, like, it is, how dare we think we can honor Christians? I don't know if that was reverse psychology on his part, but like, wow, that's an impressive argument right there. He also pointed out, and this is where my head went first, that if you allow a Christian flag to go up outside City Hall, what's going to happen when Satanists or atheists or any other group say, well, we have a flag too, and we want to put it up outside City Hall? Because he said, what are we going to do? If we reject these other requests in the future, we could be sued over that. So those were all very good points that he raised. He also said, like, all of us on this council in general, we may be okay with the Christian flag going up and what that means, but, quote, when it's the Church of Satan, maybe we won't feel so good about it. So, like, at least one member of the city council gets the problem. There was another member of city council, too. His name is John Gale. He's also a lawyer. And I want to play for you the clip of what he said, because let me tell you where this dude is coming from. He said, putting up a Christian flag violates the law. How does he know it violates the law? Because he wrote the law. He wrote the ordinance that explains why you cannot fly a religious flag outside City Hall. And this requires a little bit of background, because a few years ago in Boston, the Boston City Hall had like 3 flagpoles. And they have like the American flag and a flag for the state of Massachusetts, and then a flag that you could sign up paperwork for to get your flag put up there. And a few years ago, someone requested that they put the Christian flag on the 3rd flagpole. And the city of Boston basically said, I don't think we're allowed to do that because that would be like an endorsement of religion. And so we're going to say no. And then all the right-wing legal groups are like, jackpot, baby. So they sued, and they eventually got their case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And you know how this is going to end. The Supreme Court, I think this is in 2022, they said if Boston has a flagpole that is an open forum, anyone can apply to put up a flag there, you cannot say no to a religious group just because they want to be included in the mix. So you guys had an open forum, so you had to say yes to this request. And that's what ended up happening in Boston. So what John Gale, this dude in Hartford, who is against the Christian flag going up, what he says is, after that Supreme Court decision came down, we as a city had to figure out, well, what are we going to do? Because we do have a flagpole and we put stuff up too. And he wrote an ordinance for the city. And it said a couple things I want to highlight. The first, I'm going to show it to you right here. He wrote an ordinance and it said 2 things that were really interesting. The first is up here at the top. The city may use its flagpoles to express official city-endorsed messages from the city council that may be appropriately accompanied by ceremonial flag raising. What he wrote there is that when we put something up on our flagpole, it is the city talking. It is not an open forum for anybody. It is what we as a city are endorsing. Which means, what if I want to put up a flag that says vote for the Democrat? You can't do that because the city isn't allowed to tell you that sort of thing. Interesting. There's also one other thing he added. I'll remove myself, but look at letter G. Flagpoles are not a forum for free expression. The city's flagpoles are not intended to serve as a forum for free expression by the public. This dude literally wrote in there, you know the thing that happened in Boston? We are not that. You cannot pretend we are an open forum for your flag ideas. We're not. So it's not an open forum. We get to decide what goes up on the flagpole. That's part 1. And part 2 is that whatever we do put up on the flagpole, you can all be assured that is a message coming from the city. So there's your double whammy for why you can't put religious flags up at City Hall. So John Gale here, he's like, we cannot do this. I helped write the ordinance that says why we can't do this. But John Gale knows he is speaking to a city council that is full of morons. So let me play you the clip of this dude trying to talk sense into his colleagues, knowing full well they do not get this.
You probably have all taken a look, at least I hope you have taken a look, at Ordinance 2-13. That's an ordinance of the City of Hartford. That is law. We, council, are not authorized to violate our own ordinances, and if we do, any member of the public could sue the city for us violating it. I know members who've supported this have taken great comfort in a Supreme Court case that came out of Boston. In that case, let's be very clear, the issue was that Boston had allowed everyone to use their flag. They made no distinctions. Anybody came along, you could use the flag. They only stopped when somebody wanted to raise a Christian flag. And that's what got Boston into trouble, because at that point, their flagpole had become a free speech flagpole, like designating a corner of your city where anybody can speak about anything. That means they can speak about religion, they can speak about anything. And that is what that Supreme Court case said. It was very clear. because Boston had created a flagpole that was free speech. You couldn't deny the free speech rights to the people who wanted to raise the Christian flag. That is very different from Hartford. Our ordinance specifically says in section G, flagpoles, not a forum for free expression. The city's flag, I'm quoting here, the city's flagpoles are not intended to serve as a forum for free expression by the public. That takes us completely out of the Boston case. That's why we put it in there. I was part of the drafting of this ordinance. That is exactly why that phrase is in there, so that we didn't get into the same trouble that Boston got into. So where are you? Now that you say your flagpole is not a public forum, now it becomes government speech. And note that the ordinance says in subsection E, little 2I, city may use its flagpoles to express official city-endorsed messages. What you are doing tonight is you are passing an official city-endorsed message. The city of Hartford supports the Christian flag. That's unconstitutional, ladies and gentlemen. It's written in the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause, and there's countless Supreme Court cases that will say exactly that. Cases where all of a sudden the community wanted to put up the 10 Commandments. And the Supreme Court said, no, you had no secular purpose in putting up those 10 Commandments. It was simply put up to promote religion. And that's what's happening here. We are not in a situation like some communities where they had a 50-year history of doing certain things. This is the second year we've passed this. And Councilman Mictum and I opposed it last year. We'll oppose it next year if you bring it out again. This is contrary to our ordinance. It's contrary to law.
So that is a long clip, but I wanted you to hear all of that because here's a dude talking so much sense and nobody is paying attention to what he is saying. Because after he spoke, they eventually voted on whether that Christian flag should go up, and the vote was 7-2 for the flag to go up. And the two voices of reason were the only people who opposed it. And then on Easter, or just before Easter, here's Hartford City Council, and there it is. There's the Christian flag at the very top right there. It was up there for like 4 or 5 days until they took it down, something like that. Here's the thing. He mentioned this in the clip, but John Gale mentioned this. This is the second year they've done this. It was illegal last year too, but for whatever reason, it didn't get a lot of attention. And now they're like playing with fire because now they're doing it again, thinking we got away with it in year one. Why don't we just do it again in year two? And that city council members like, don't do it. This is wrong. We are going to get sued over this. And here's the question that I want you to think about. Will anybody sue over this? No doubt there are people in Hartford who have a problem with what just happened, who might have legal standing to bring this case. However, here's the other thing to consider. Because I asked some church-state separation groups if they were going to do anything about this. I did not hear anything in the affirmative. And the reason I think they're hesitant to sue over this is because they're really afraid that even if they win, because they should win, right-wing legal groups will get this case all the way back up to the Supreme Court. And all of a sudden, every city council everywhere will be allowed to put up Christian flags if they want to. And that would be a huge disaster. So what would you do if you're a lawyer in this case for the church-state separation side? Do you say, you know what they're doing in Hartford is wrong, but it's a lot better to just let this city screw up and do the thing they're doing rather than try to fix it and make the whole problem worse? And I think that's the strategic calculation that they are making here, that we're just going to let this one slide because we don't want to see this taken into the courtroom. Well, maybe we'll send a letter, but if they don't fix it, there's not much we can do about it. And I hate that that might actually be the sensible thing to do to avoid a bigger catastrophe down the line. But I wanted to let you know that happened. If you live in the city of Hartford, keep that in mind when you're thinking about, who to vote for in the next city council election. These people are not doing what's in the best interest of the community. At least, 7 of them. All right, I'm going to pause there for now. What do we got? This is why lawyers get so frustrated with their clients. They work so hard to get the contract right, and then the client immediately screws the whole thing up. Yeah, here's the city council member saying, I wrote this bill to avoid a legal problem, and here you are saying, who cares what you wrote? We're going to put up the flag anyway. To hell with words we don't understand, like Constitution. Yeah, it's got to be frustrating if you're that guy, but also I am so glad a guy like that is on their city council. Why do they have to put it up on public property? Put it up across the street. I wouldn't care. That's precisely why they want it up on public property, because these Christians are like animals that want to pee over their property. They want to show domination. They want to show, this is mine. You can't have it. So putting up a Christian flag outside City Hall or at the White House or whatever it is, it's a sign that shows, yeah, we can do this and you can't, because you're inferior to us. That's why they want to do it in public places. They're not interested in putting up a Christian flag at their church. They don't care about that. They want to do it to make you realize you are inferior to them. Can that city council member sue them himself? That's a good question. I am not sure legally if that's allowed or if he's interested or wants to. I don't know. I also don't know if these city council members would be interested in doing that, because I'm sure, at any city council, your colleagues are always idiots and they're always voting for things that are not good for the city. But if you are a city council member, I think, strategically, it's better to get yourself on the record saying, I oppose this. We are going to get sued over this. I want the public to know I don't think this is a good idea. And then sit back and let the chips fall where they may. Because if someone else sues, you can go back to the public and say, I told you this was going to happen, so vote for me and get those idiots out of here, rather than being the person that could theoretically sue your own city, and then the city gets punished, even if you're a winner. It's probably not a good look. So we're stuck tolerating the slow creep of Christian nationalism in hopes that it'll stave off a more dramatic court-ordered Christian nationalism. Yeah, that pretty much nails it. Though I would specify, we're stuck tolerating the slow creep of Christian nationalism in individual places, in certain cities, at certain school boards. Then you have to calculate whether it's worth filing lawsuits over this stuff because of what the court makeup is right now and where the law is right now, where, laws don't matter if you're a Republican. You can get pardoned if you break the law if you're a Republican. So yeah, unfortunately, you're nailing it, and that's the strategic calculation. Do we atheists have a flag? Unofficially, no. Various organizations, American Atheists has a symbol they use. Different atheist groups might have their logos and stuff like that. But no, there's no universal sign for atheists. We did not vote on it. If you even tried to do that, people would rebel against it. But, just put my face on it and raise it, and that's the new flag. And I declare that because I'm king. All right, I got one more story for you, and then we'll go to the tweets and stuff. And this is another update for you. Let me pull this up. Okay. In Ohio, I have made videos about this before. There is now a law in Ohio that requires every public school district to offer released time for children. What is release time? Again, I've explained this before, so I won't go through the whole thing now. But basically, children are allowed to skip certain parts of the school day to be taken to religious indoctrination classes. And the way they've done this so far, in certain school districts, if not everywhere, is that church communities can say, we're going to hire staff. We're going to transport kids from the school to our church for 45 minutes and teach them religious, Sunday school education, and then we'll bring them back to school. And the districts may have rules about which periods the students can leave. And, is there a background check for the staffers involved? All that stuff. And a handful of school districts had done this. There's one group in Ohio called LifeWise Academy that basically said, hey, we're a Christian ministry that will handle all of this for your church. Like churches pay them money, and LifeWise takes care of background checks and staffers, and they get the buses and everything, and they take kids to your church for some sort of fee, whatever it is. And a lot of Christian groups in Ohio specifically, LifeWise has done this all over the country, but Ohio is one of their big places. And it got so popular. And there were some school districts that are like, we don't like that a lot of kids are ditching school for religious education classes. Because like when a bunch of kids miss school, the teachers can't actually do any work. You can't teach 4 kids who are left in your class because the next day when everyone's back in the class, you're going to have to reteach it anyway. It's why teachers don't like field trips by and large, because you just can't get anything done. And so some school districts in Ohio said, you know what? We're just not going to allow anyone to do release time. That's not anti-Christian. We're being neutral about it. No one gets to leave campus for, these types of reasons. And because that was legal, all the religious conservatives in Ohio are like, what can we do? Because we want to make sure Christian families can get their kids out of public schools because we hate public schools. And so the Ohio Republicans recently passed a law requiring every public school district in the state to allow for released time. You don't get to choose whether or not to offer it. You have to offer it now. That's what the new law in Ohio says. And again, I've talked about this before, but why is religious education, why is release time a bad idea? You can imagine if there's a community where there's a lot of Christians taking these classes, one, these kids they're usually leaving electives. They're not leaving math class or English class, but like art, band, Spanish, they might leave those classes to get indoctrinated. And what does that tell you about how these communities value the arts or electives or music or anything like that? And also, if a bunch of your friends are going to these classes, what happens if you're like the kid who's left behind in school? You're going to go to your parents and say, my friend goes to this thing and he likes it and he comes back with candy. I want to go, Mom. And if your family's non-Christian, that's a lot of peer pressure. That's a lot of coercion for that kid to deal with. So these classes are not good. I mean, I wish I could just say, just stick with Sunday school. What is wrong with that? But I know the answer. The reason they want to take kids out of public school to give them these religious classes is because they don't value public schools, period. So that's why they do this. And again, Ohio Republicans passed a law that now requires every district in the state to allow kids to leave school for released time. But here's the thing about that. That means every public school district in the state of Ohio now needs a policy on how it's going to handle released time. Because all the law says now is you got to allow it to happen. But the school districts get to set the parameters. What periods are kids allowed to leave? What has to happen when they leave school? How many days a week are they allowed to leave school to go to these classes? Like, you have to allow them to go, but you can set limits on the nature of released time. So if you are a school district, if you're a school board, you might think to yourself, well, shit, we never used to do release time and now we're going to do it. We need to write a legal policy and pass a legal policy about how we're going to do release time. And when I talked about this a couple weeks ago, I mentioned a school district, the Columbus City School District, because they just passed their policies for release time. And one of the big things they said is for any kid who's going to these religious classes, you cannot return from religious class, with candy or toys. You can't come back with that stuff because we know what you're doing. You're trying to bribe the other kids. If you're like the church teacher, you're like, hey, kids in religious class, here's some candy. Go back to school. Why? So you could tell all your friends how amazing Bible class was, and you got candy and little toys, and it was like going to Chuck E. Cheese or something. And it's a form of peer pressure. So Columbus City Schools basically said, okay, part of our policy for release time is no matter where you go, when you come back, no toys, no trinkets, no candy. And at the time, LifeWise Academy is like, whatever, we don't care. We're still going to offer these classes. And like, yeah, that's what they had to say. What else were they going to say? Are they going to say like, what? We like our bribes? No. So like they just smiled and nodded. But this is where it gets interesting. And this is what's different from the last time I talked about this story. It turns out if you're a school board and you did not have a released time policy before, well, you need one now because the law says you have to. So where are you going to do that? Part of me thinks, all right, so some school board member is going to like write one from scratch and present it to the board and they're all going to vote on it. But that's not actually how it works because there are lawyers involved and you can't write a policy that inadvertently breaks the law. So you have to run this by lawyers. Well, it turns out in a part of Ohio, there is a group called Northeast Ohio Learning Associates. And basically, this is an organization that school districts can pay money to. And the only job of this organization is we write policies that you can use in your school districts because we know the law. We will write the policies. We will help you tailor them to your district's needs and make sure they pass the legal test. And like they are here to help you and your school board write all your policies. And if you go to their website right now, check this out. Like Neola, this is the Northeast Ohio group, Learning Associates group. Like one of the things they say on their website, our job, our mission is to help institutions set direction through supportive policy services in an ever-evolving legal landscape, which is a very fancy term for saying, look, these Republican idiots in Ohio, they change the law a lot. We're here to help you navigate it. And by the way, this organization, as far as I know, is not a left-wing or right-wing group. They're just a policy group. They say, look, you need a policy on this. We'll do the work for you. That's what you're giving us money to do. And then we'll give you a draft that you can use. You could pass it as it is. You can make modifications and run it by your lawyers, but like that's their job. And the thing that the Columbus City Schools passed earlier this month about the no candy, no trinkets, that was actually a suggestion that they got from an organization like Neola. But I want to show you their draft policy for release time, because this is what I find fascinating. Neola, after this law passed in Ohio, that you have to do release time, they sent all of their client school boards a draft policy saying, look, we used to have a release time policy because school districts were interested in that. And they said, but now the new law passed and you're all going to need to have a policy. So we have updated our release time policy and we are now sending that to you. And so they sent this out to all their member schools. And so what did they say in the draft policy? Let me give you an example of what they did here. So in their old release time policy, that's in the black at the top, it said students shall not be excused from a core curriculum subject course to attend release time instruction. That's what they used to say, which is basically saying you can't leave math or English or science. You have to take those, but you can leave Spanish, band, music, something like that. Look what they are adding now. Their new policy in response to the new Republican law says the school board deems all graded courses to be core curriculum, including but not limited to courses that have state-approved learning standards. So if you get a grade in the class, they're saying you cannot leave school during any period that you might be in a class where you get a grade in. So, for example, when I took a foreign language in high school, I got a grade. I would not be allowed to leave that class to go. What about band? If band is not a pass-fail class, but you get a letter grade, you can't leave it. You could leave during lunch. You know, you don't get a grade for that. If you have an off period, you can leave for that. But if you get a grade in the class, or the state of Ohio says there are certain things you gotta learn in this particular course, the board policy here, the draft policy says you can't leave one of those classes. Interesting, a little more specific than before. Here's another policy that Neola suggested school boards adopt. You got to set a limitation on when people can leave school for these classes. So this is all new. Release time instruction will be limited to X days per quarter, per semester, per year, as established by the superintendent, and shall not exceed X minutes inclusive of travel. So again, very wide open here. A school district could say, you can only go for these release time classes like 10 days a semester, and those classes should be no more than 45 minutes long. Okay, that's a sensible thing. That way no kid is taking advantage of it by leaving every single day for multiple hours or anything like that. So, okay, that one makes sense because you need to specify how long these kids can go. This is interesting. What about background checks? Neola offered two different versions of a background check policy, but let's read through a little of this. Criminal records will come at no cost to the school board. Any church that is doing this, they have to pay for the background checks. I'm paraphrasing. I'm sorry. I'm not reading this stuff. But they're basically saying the church has to pay for the background checks. They have to submit paperwork to the school district that says, this is who's teaching the classes. Here's what the background check says. And so the schools can have that on file. It's that sort of thing. Again, that totally makes sense. Put the onus on the churches to do the background checks for whoever they have teaching these courses, because the school district wants to make sure if kids are leaving campus, they're still going to be in safe hands. You know what I mean? Makes sense. There's one more thing I want to show you from Neola, which is the bribery line. Any private entity providing religious instruction during the school day must agree that it will not provide participating students with any material, snacks, clothing, candies, trinkets, or other items for their return to school. And the district will not allow kids to go to religious instruction release time to any group that does not obey this rule. So, okay, first of all, this is where the Columbus City Schools got their policy from. I didn't know they were getting it from like the copy-paste center, but they did. But again, this is a sensible policy because it prevents a level of peer pressure and coercion, right? So this is what Neola is saying to school districts. Here's what we're suggesting you do. And it's up to you to adopt these policies or adjust them, but this is what we think you ought to do, right? So here's where it gets interesting. At the end of their sample text that they sent all these school districts, Neola pointed out that the law that Republicans in Ohio passed, they actually do not offer any guidelines on how to handle release time. So they urged all the school districts to adopt flexible, less restrictive policies. They said, look, we're giving you some guidelines here, but it's up to you to figure out what to do. And our suggestion, so that you avoid any legal problems, is to be as open as possible to allowing students to do this. It's guidance, right? Like take it or leave it. That's what they're thinking. And so when they sent this out, guess who got angry about it? Republicans, because they don't want any restrictions on release time. And they definitely don't want any school telling churches they can't give bribes to kids, or that they might not be allowed to, a school district may not be wanting to send kids to their church because the background checks did not go through or anything like that. So earlier this month, check this out. Here we go. Dave Yost, the Attorney General, the Republican Attorney General of Ohio, sent a letter to every school board in the state. And check out what he said here. Look at this. Some outside, this is at the very top. Some outside organizations offering advice or proposing draft policies may be more interested in finding ways to thwart the new law than ensuring that districts enact compliant policies under the law. He's basically saying, we know what they're sending you, and if you adopt those policies, I'm going to come after you, because how dare you interfere with churches stealing kids from public schools and then bribing the rest of the kids who did not come to church class. So he basically said, if you adopt any of these policies, I'm warning you, even though, by the way, there's nothing wrong with the draft policy. So that's one thing. He just said he noticed some policy pitfalls in what they were doing. So one example, he said, I'm not going to go through the entire letter. one of the specific things he mentioned is these groups offered a don't bring bribes back to school clause, right? The no trinkets policy. And what Yost said, the Attorney General said, is that rules like that would prohibit sharing literature like memory cards, devotional lesson books, or even Bibles. Therefore, districts should avoid any language of that sort. So the Attorney General is saying, how dare you prevent kids from bringing little mini chick tracts or Bibles back to school so they can give to their friends, because that's totally what teenagers do. They bring little Bibles to share with their friends. So he's saying, don't adopt that policy, because Republicans really want to make sure that kids come back from religious classes with bribes. He says it's about like mini Bibles, but really it's about chocolate and toys. But that's what he's doing. And now, after he sent that letter, the right-wing legal group, First Liberty, has sent their own letter to school districts saying, do not follow Neola's policy specifically. And they say that if you adopt the no trinkets policy, that goes beyond what the Republican law says. So you can't pass it, because that would invite intrusion upon the First Amendment rights of students and their parents, as well as the organizations providing release time education. Let me put that another way. They are saying if you adopt any policy that says you cannot bring chocolate and other candies and toys back from church when you return to school, if you don't allow them to do that, you are intruding upon the Christians' First Amendment rights, which sounds like bullshit to me. But when you get a letter from a legal organization, it's going to sound scary. Like, these people are so desperate for kids to bring back bribes. The other thing First Liberty mentioned is they also brought up the background check policy. This is one that actually surprised me, because they said that the proposed background checks and how districts could say, if you don't give us the paperwork that confirms the background checks, we're not going to allow kids to leave school to go to your organization. They said that is unfair because it makes those religious groups have to jump through too many hoops. Like, look at this. This is what First Liberty said to a local journalist. Jeremy Dice, senior legal counsel for the First Liberty Institute, told the Columbus Dispatch that the Neola policy was so many layers of bureaucracy that it will discourage anybody from participation in what he said was a violation of the First Amendment. It almost reads as if Neola is trying to work with others that don't want to see release time education occurring. That's not true. He's just a liar. So they're creating a lot of bureaucratic traps along the way that would make it really, really, really hard. Oh, sure, you can do release time education, but you got to jump through 895 fiery hoops in order to do that. Let me recall for you. What did Neola say? They said, bribes are bad, so you should say no to bribes. And also, you should make sure there are like no pedos teaching these classes. And here's First Liberty saying, oh my God, all these bureaucratic hurdles. It's so much for us to jump through. How dare you? We will sue you for violating our First Amendment rights if you punish these churches for not doing background checks or for giving bribes to the kids who come to their classes. Unfreaking believable that they are doing this. Like, what a batshit crazy thing to push for when it comes to the safety of children. But it's not surprising to me that a conservative group is saying, come on, background checks, you're going to hold up release time over background check? Of course they don't care about background checks. First Liberty also says Neola is trying to exploit a loophole by saying all classes where you get grades in are now core classes. And First Liberty says you are allowing school districts to block kids from going to release time altogether, which, again, that is not true. Students can always leave for release time during lunch or if they have another off period or something. But like, if you're one of those kids whose schedule is filled up with hard classes in which you get grades, and you do not have time to go to church during the middle of the day because your classes are too important, that is not illegal. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, not every kid is going to be able to do release time because they actually have important stuff to learn. You know what I mean? And First Liberty here is saying, well, the way you made it sound, like a lot of smart kids and a lot of kids who really load up their schedule won't be able to do it. Well, then, yeah, the school's not forced to make sure every kid can do release time. It is optional. And the school district's only job, according to the law, is to allow the kids who can do it to do it. Like, they can't prevent that from happening, but they can set boundaries. And if the boundaries that they set make it clear that certain kids cannot skip school to go to religious indoctrination class and unlearn what they're learning in science class, that's not illegal. Like, the school district has to figure this stuff out. So First Liberty is just bullshitting here, right? So the bottom line is that this law was hastily put together by Republicans because they really wanted to pass this. And now groups like Neola are trying to help school districts navigate this bill that has no boundaries while also conforming to the law and also making sure school districts are offering the best possible education to students. And this is what one of the spokespeople for Neola also told the Columbus Dispatch here. Corbett said the threat of litigation is concerning, saying that some religious release providers have taken a really aggressive approach to a brand new requirement that the 600 plus school districts in Ohio are trying to figure out, which is exactly the issue here. Republicans passed a shitty law. All these school districts have to figure out how to deal with it. Some groups like Neola are saying, here, we've done the legwork for you and you can use our policies. And now right-wing Republicans are like, oh no, they're setting up restrictions. How dare you? We're going to come after you for trying to follow the law that we hastily put together. Like, again, all of this is just Republicans trying to find ways to attack public schools. That's what this all boils down to. So, I mean, if strong background checks for employees and a ban on bribes are too many hoops for a Christian ministry to jump through, they should not be wasting anyone's time in the first place. The only thing school districts have to do is allow for release time. They do not have to make sure every kid can do it. They can set whatever boundaries they want, especially when it comes to the safety and well-being of students. And just because right-wing zealots don't give a damn about secular education, it doesn't mean school boards should follow suit, right? Like, if school districts were blocking students from skipping class to learn about Jesus, there is a reason they could be sued. But the sample guidance that they were given just make sure students are going to a safe place. They are not distracting their classmates when they get back to school. They're not avoiding required classes to attend something that really they should be doing on weekends. Like, I think these right-wing groups, they thrive on publicity. But here's the thing. They got what they wanted. Republicans passed their law, and now they're mad because school districts, unlike them, have higher standards. And they cannot deal with that because they're so used to setting the bar low and then doing whatever they want. So for now, the strategic thing to do may be just to play defense and make sure any policy avoids potential traps. But like, it's not a trap to have high standards for background checks and make clear what classes students should not be skipping and implementing a ban on bribes, right? Like, if public schools have to accommodate religious conservatives, the least they can do is make it harder for those religious conservatives to recruit fresh meat by using kids as target practice. All right, I'm done with this story. What questions we got here? And then I'm done. Send out the bat signal for the Satanic Temple. We need a Hail Academy out there stat. There may actually be one of those for release time specifically. But again, this is, even churches do not always have the money and the resources they need to make this happen. So if the Satanic Temple did it, my assumption is that they would do it in one place where they have a very little space near a school. They have someone who they can offer as a volunteer who could teach that class. And is it just a publicity stunt? Maybe, but like, it's fine. But the thing is anyone going to fight it? Because I don't think First Liberty or any of those right-wing groups would be mad about that per se, because they know damn well that no matter what the Satanic Temple or some atheist group does, it's always going to pale in comparison to what groups like LifeWise can offer, because Christians have all the money in this case. They have all the resources they need. So yes, it would be fun to see a satanic version of Release Time. But also, I mean, I don't want kids to leave in the middle of the school day for any of this stuff. They shouldn't be learning this stuff during the school day. But if you did it, you have to think about, why are we trying to do this in this district? Because kids are fine going to public school. They do not need to leave to learn to be kind. And that obviously is not what the Christian groups are teaching. They're trying to indoctrinate them. Sounds like a good way to get out of PE. Just saying, can you pick church at home with lunch? Again, this is what the districts need to figure out. Is gym class, for example, something that the school district says is required that you get a grade in? Or is gym class something the school says kids are allowed to skip? And the law doesn't give you an answer. So the districts have to figure this out. And if they say we're okay with kids skipping PE, what does that tell you about the school board's commitment to physical education, to the teachers who teach those classes? It's saying, we don't value you that much. So again, this is something they got to navigate, which is why if you want to skip lunch and eat your lunch at the church or something, okay. But also, even if I'm a religious parent, it's like, kid, go to school during the week. We'll work with religious education at home or after school or anything like that. They specifically are doing this to get kids out of public school because they do not want public schools to succeed. So they're claiming that bribing children is part of the free practice of their religion. That is correct. And by the way, notice they didn't talk about bribes, and they didn't talk about chocolate, and they didn't talk about toys. When they're writing their legal letters, they say, how dare you stop kids from bringing Bibles back to share with their friends? Or like some Christian, pamphlet. And it's like, dude, first of all, that's not what they're doing, and that's not what we're talking about. But clearly, they're like saying, don't go after Bibles. That's attacking our First Amendment rights, when they know damn well this is about like food, candy, toys, things like that. All right, we're going to get to last call. I have not seen these since I tweeted them. Den picked all these out. Den, what are we talking about here? All right, what's on this list? All right, this first one. The federal government plans to eliminate services for LGBTQ youth who call 988, the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline, according to a HHS budget draft leaked last week. Yeah, this was a news story that said Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and his brainworms want to get rid of the helpline that I forgot the number. Like, that number has been called a lot of times by teenagers who are in need. And the last administration actively promoted it to make sure to address the mental health crisis in public schools. And these idiots are like, you know what? We're going to cut it. No one needs that stuff because they don't actually value mental health. Mental health for Republicans is the line you offer after a school shooting to get everyone's attention off of guns. You say, we just need better mental health services. And here's the mental health service. And RFK Jr. is like, let's get rid of it. Or maybe that's Elon. I don't know. But again, it's just an entire Republican administration full of the worst human beings in the country. And they always talk about how much they love Jesus, but all they have been doing is making life harder for the most vulnerable members of our society. Oh my God. J.K. Rowling. So in the UK, the Supreme Court in Britain, they basically said, we're going to, I don't know the nuance of the UK policy, but it was not good for trans people. They basically said there are two genders as far as we're concerned. And J.K. Rowling she tweeted this picture right after that ruling came down with like a cigar in one hand and a drink in the other, because she's having a little party in, what is that, her yacht? Her backyard? It could be either one. I don't know. But she's celebrating. I love it when a plan comes together. Hashtag Supreme Court. Hashtag women's rights. And that tracks. That's who she is now. Her entire identity is no longer the Harry Potter lady. It is the woman who really hates trans people. It's like Richard Dawkins. Same horrible trajectory. And I like this suggestion from this other person. We all need to treat Harry Potter intellectual property like we treat Tesla. So that means for all of you, if you don't like, no, stop watching any movies. There's like an HBO show that is coming out, like that's a reboot of the Harry Potter franchise. Do not watch it. You should trash it. Like, do not celebrate anyone who's in those movies. Just, you're done with Harry Potter for the rest of your life now. Do not advocate it. Do not promote it. Do for her what you did for Elon and just tank the brand. She doesn't deserve the money. Do not go to the Harry Potter theme park in Florida or wherever else it is. I think that's a sensible move. And by the way, if you really like the books and you want to read them to like your kids or something like that, I don't know, check them out from the library if you have to. Don't put money in her hands. But beyond that, do not celebrate the property. Don't talk about Harry Potter if you can help it, right? Like, treat her the same way we treat Elon Musk, which is the name should become a punchline. And even though there might be value in what she created, there's value in other things too, and we can promote the rest of it. So I'm all for it. I don't know why people still treat her like she is now a symbol for something amazing. What I don't get about J.K. Rowling, though, Elon Musk grew up wealthy and remained wealthy and is now the richest person in the world. I get why he's an asshole, because he never had to work for anything, really. Richard Dawkins, honestly, different story, but the same thing. He grew up in an upper class family. And I know he studied and he's very smart and stuff, but like he's spent the majority of his life being the most famous person in any room he walked into, arguably the richest guy in any room he walked into. But J.K. Rowling, if you know anything about her story, she was not rich growing up, and there was a part of her life, I think, that she was getting money from the government. I'm not sure, but like single mother, did not have anything going for her. And then as the story goes, the Harry Potter idea came to her. She wrote the book, the rest is history. But like, she should know what it's like when vulnerable communities feel like they have nowhere to go. And then she became rich. And what I don't get is now that she has wealth and fame, she's using it to make the lives of other people worse. I kind of get it if you're Elon Musk. I really don't get it if you're coming from such a not wealthy place to begin with. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't get what's up with her, but I could say that about a lot of very powerful people in the UK, because it's not like the UK is like the US is horrible for trans people, but the UK is somehow way worse. All right, this is a neat update. I did a story a week or two ago about a Catholic hospital, Mercy One, I think in Colorado, was it? And basically, they had to deal with a malpractice case. A woman was suing the hospital, saying the doctors at this Catholic hospital did not save my fetus, and the fetus died. And I'm suing you for malpractice because that fetus should have been alive. And that's your fault. You did not take care of my fetus. And the hospital is saying to courts, the hospital's lawyers were saying to the judge that, wow, if you sue us because the fetus is a person, we would have to pay a lot more in malpractice insurance. So we're going to go to court and say a fetus is not a person, so we should not have to pay out as much. And the thing is, the Catholic Church says the exact opposite. The Catholic Church says, like, you're a person from the moment of conception. And so this was kind of hypocritical, because the Catholic hospital, to save money, their lawyers were arguing we should all ignore Catholic doctrine, right? And that was funny, even though the whole story is sad. But here's an update for you. Ever since there was a media firestorm about the hypocrisy here, the church's lawyers, the Catholic hospital's lawyers, have gone back to court, and they told the judge, yeah, you know that argument we made that a fetus is not a person, so we should be capped in how much we might have to pay out? We're not going to make that argument anymore. And I believe in that article, even the judge is like, yeah, it sounds about right, because I thought your argument was kind of weird. Even the judge is like, yeah, I thought you guys were being hypocrites there. But good. And now the question is, now that the cap has been lifted, how much will Mercy One have to pay out for malpractice insurance? There's a long way to go before we get an answer to that question, because first you got to have a jury decide, was there malpractice? Then how much are they going to have to pay out? And it's going to take a while. But I do appreciate that they finally reversed course on that dumb legal argument that contradicted their own beliefs. Oh, okay. This is fun. Let me tell you a story about this. This is Diana Harshbarger. Actually, I'm sorry, Dan, I'm going to jump in right here. This is to the J.K. Rowling thing. This is J.K. Rowling grew up well off. She was not as poor as she said. I actually don't know if you're right or wrong about that. I do know that she has said in interviews that at some point she was a single mother who was like riding on a train. That's what I mean by she didn't have a ton of money. I don't know what she had. That's all I meant. But she was definitely not super wealthy, like growing up in the same way Elon Musk's dad had an emerald mine or whatever. That's all I meant to say. So thank you for clarifying me on that. Okay, so here's the story about this. I got a tip a couple days ago where someone said, here's a Republican congresswoman. She did an interview with some small Christian podcaster, and there's some religion that they discuss in this 20-minute interview. And the person had not listened to the interview, but they said, hey, she's talking about religion. You should watch this, and maybe there might be something in here that might be interesting. So I was watching this clip, and this is one of the things that this is Diana Harshbarger from Tennessee. This is what she pointed out. She said the devil's not messing with her. She's a good Christian. But you know who he might be messing with? Vladimir Zelensky. Let's play this clip. And Den, I hope you have the other clip from Diana Harshbarger right after this. If not, I'll talk about it.
You're taught in spiritual warfare, the devil can only be in one place at one time. And I don't think he's messing with me. But with Russian president or Ukrainian, or we don't know where he's at. But he's got all these little henchmen that are demons that are wreaking havoc in every area of our lives.
Yeah, just the idea that a sitting U.S. congresswoman is like, yeah, the Ukrainian president, Satan's sending him all these little henchmen that are demons. Like, that is insane talk. Like, if you heard a pastor say that, you would say that person is batshit crazy. This is a sitting U.S. congresswoman. So, Dan, if you don't have the next clip, it's fine. But the story, oh, here we go. So get this. So I'm watching this interview, and I watch the religion section of it, and I see that particular clip where she talked about the devil. I'm like, that is a little weird. I'm going to share that with people. And then I kept watching the rest of the interview, and at the very end of it, like the last 30 seconds, she somehow said something even worse, because now she's done with the interview, and she's just speaking with the interviewer, like they're just riffing, and she's talking about, man, I have to work with all these crazy liberals. And she references Al Green, who is the black congressman you might remember from Trump's State of the Union a couple months ago, where Al Green got up in the middle of the speech and shook his cane in Donald Trump's direction, and Al Green was escorted out. And if you remember the media coverage after that, it's like, yeah, you know what? I wish more Democrats were like Al Green, willing to risk getting thrown out of that chamber of Congress, rather than the weak Democrats who sat in their seats with stupid little paddles with signs on them. So like, Al Green, good for you. But she was talking about Al Green, and I heard this, and I'm like, this is not even what someone sent me this clip to show, but oh my God. So play this. Listen to what she said.
And
signs up during the State of the
now
Union.
that's not me. I wanted to go over there and grab a few of them, but Al Green was over here with his cane, and I'm like, gosh, dang it, boy, put that. He does not need that cane. That cane is a prop. I swear it's not real. And I'm wondering, one of my colleagues said, screw the gold part off of that. See if there's a gun in there. I'm like, I don't know about that man. He's just Weird Al. Okay. And
she said so many things in that clip. First of all, she called him boy, which has a lot of racial connotations there. When a white person calls a black person boy, he's like a 70, 80-year-old guy. That's messed up. Then she says the cane he's using that he's had because he has a disability is a prop. It's not a prop. Then she says if you unscrew it, you're going to find a gun in there. I believe Al Green held a press conference this week where he literally unscrewed his cane and there was nothing inside. But what I appreciate is someone sent me this clip because they're like, she talks about religion. And because she got so comfortable talking about religion, she opened up in a way, knowing the cameras were still on, and just talks casually, is a racist casually, mocks a member of Congress who is disabled casually, and just says it. Like, this is the way she talks to her buddies behind closed doors. And I was able to share this, and this actually got enough traction that she had to respond to it later in the week. Al Green responded and held a little press conference about it later in the week. And I did see, if you look up this woman's name in the news, there were plenty of articles written about the racist, insinuation she's making with all this too. And you know what? Damn it, I want some credit for that. I found that clip after someone sent me the original thing. But that aside, this just shows you, if you watch some of these interviews with radical right-wing people, they assume the only people watching their interviews are other crazy radicals. And if you listen to them, you hear some crazy, crazy stuff. And as some of you are pointing out, I interviewed a YouTuber, atheist, Christy Burke, not long ago. And one of the things that happened to her is this is her congresswoman in Tennessee. And she went to a town hall meeting to ask Diana Harshbarger about some stuff. And for asking those questions and protesting at that meeting, Christie was kicked out because they didn't want any protests or anything like that. So anyway, that clip is just wild. This is also, I got to break another story this week. This is someone in the Department of Veterans Affairs emailed me and they said, we just got an email asking us to share examples of anti-Christian bias. And you may recall, I made a video about this. Trump issued an executive order, which means nothing really, but he said, we're going to stamp out anti-Christian bias in the government. And the video I made was like, in his executive order, he had examples of anti-Christian bias, supposedly. But if you actually look through those stories, there was no anti-Christian bias. There was just like some Christians were being assholes and then they got punished for being assholes. And all these people were like, you're going after them for being Christian. It's like, no, that has nothing to do with it. Well, the Department of Veterans Affairs sent out an email to all employees saying, we want you to tattle on your colleagues and tell us if you've ever been the victim of anti-Christian bias. And I was able to share that news, and specifically what they said counted as anti-Christian bias, which is pretty much anything and everything. But the interesting thing is they also have the email address right there, anti-Christian bias reporting at va.gov. I don't know. I guess you could send them anything you want. But I all of this is to say, listen, if you have a story tip, you should send it my way. I will try to get it out there. This is interesting too. I didn't know this. We always talk about the Wisconsin Supreme Court because it's like always teetering. It was like a 3-3 tie, and then there was an election, and will it be a liberal majority or a conservative majority? And the past two times they've had these existential elections, the liberal candidate has won. And so there is currently a 4-3 majority for the good guys on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which means they can get rid of gerrymandering and they can undo a lot of the worst inclinations of Republicans. Well, in Michigan, this is what surprised me. Michigan's Chief Justice retired, which makes the Supreme Court 5-1 Democratic, and Gretchen Whitmer gets to appoint the replacement, which is incredible. I didn't know Michigan Supreme Court was not as evenly divided. That's kind of incredible. But it also reminds me, I think Montana is the state where, as red as Montana is, the Montana State Supreme Court has a majority of liberals on it. And so occasionally you will see really good court rulings coming out of Montana for that reason. It surprises me every time. What else we got here? This one we'll skip because we already played this during the Pope one. What is this one? This is Tuna. You have once again taken him to the vet instead of the park. Fool him once, shame on you. Fool him twice, even more shame on you. Aw, I like that account, We Rate Dogs. It just shows cute dogs. I don't normally like dogs, but that is a very cute dog. I don't know what else to say about that one. Cool. That's all we got today. I should be back at the same time next week. Thank you so much for being around. I know it's a Thursday night, but thank you for watching. Thank you so much to Den. I can't do this without Den, so he helps make all this easier. And we'll see you next week. Have a good one.